Thank you, Courtney. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a great privilege to come back to Primary Purpose Group. It's been since pre-COVID, I think, since I've been down here, and it's wonderful to see some familiar faces. That the more things change, the more they stay the same. So, I am an alcoholic. My name is Newton P. I understand this is being recorded, so I'm going to try to not slip and give anybody's last name. My sobriety date is April 10th, 1981. I have a sponsor. I have a service sponsor. I am a recovery sponsor to 9.5 guys, and I'm a service sponsor to currently 11 men and women. My home group is the morning meditation group where I met Courtney, and thank you, Brooks, another member of the home group, for being the truth squad here, keep me honest. So this is my least favorite thing to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's kind of, the best analogy I ever heard for it was, it's like being elected the most attractive man on the cell block. It's a nice honor, but I'm not sure I want to come forward and accept the reward. But it really is, it's a great opportunity, and that's an important part of what we do in AA. And is this anybody's first AA meeting? I mean, other than the young fellow over there. Is it anybody's first meeting? Okay, it's your first meeting. Welcome. Boy, and the pressure's on. So what I'm supposed to do is describe in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And for years telling my story, what happened for me was getting sober, not drinking. And I'm sure I'll spend too long on that part of my story, but it's over the last few years I've come to believe that the real before and after picture for me was came at 11 years of not drinking, when I hit a new bottom in sobriety, a new emotional and spiritual bottom. I had what I have come to believe was a spiritual experience. And you don't have to have one of those kind of things. They can be very gradual. And it was up till that time. It was a gradual awakening. But for a doubting Thomas like me, when I hit that bottom, and hopefully I'll have time to tell you a little bit about the circumstances of it, I experienced a God who loved me unconditionally, and that has made all the difference in the world to me. And it's more so than being sober, being physically sober. It has changed my life and changed what I believe to be the meaning of life. So I was born and raised in Raleigh. I'm a junior. Senior had a MD after his name, and from far back as I can remember, I used to go on house calls with him. How long ago that was. Doctors made house calls in those days, and I had a little stethoscope around my neck, and everybody thought that was real cute, and it was just assumed. It was just part of the family lore that I was going to grow up, and about the time he was ready to retire, I would take over his practice, and that's what my life would be. And I was okay with that. It didn't work out that way because alcohol played a part in what would later happen. But that wasn't the only reason. But my home life, I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but if you've ever, there is a skit that they used to perform, I don't know whether they still do, in treatment centers by a guy named Bradshaw. And it's the dysfunctional family skit. And there is the father in the skit is the alcoholic, and the mother in the skit is the Al-Anon. And Al-Anon is our program for family and friends of alcoholics. And then the kids take on certain roles that are predictable. And they're, in the skit, there are 4 kids, so they have 4 different roles. We only had 3. So my oldest sister was the rebel. If you had looked down on our family from 10,000 feet while I was growing up, you would have said, she's going to be the one who gets in trouble. She's going to be the alcoholic. It just turns out that alcohol doesn't do for her what it does for me. But she and my father were always battling. My father was not an alcoholic, but turned out he was the adult child of an alcoholic. That was a family secret that I didn't know about until after he died at 90 years old, when one of my sisters told me that his father was an alcoholic. That's how much of a secret it was, how much we just didn't talk about it. My middle sister was the hero. She was a champion golfer. She was a nationally ranked golfer, and my father was her coach. And it's kind of like I see one of these kids on the tennis tour now, and they've got the tennis dad who's, the coach and runs their life, and I feel for them because it's a tough role to play. And but she got all the positive attention, and my oldest sister got all the negative attention. And I was the ghost. I kind of fell behind in the wake, and the positive wake from my middle sister and the negative wake from my oldest sister, and I got away with everything I could. I was really good at being sneaky. That's a nice word for being dishonest, but that's what I was. And, I felt like I was the chameleon. I felt like, I had no sense of self. I lived for trying to get you to like me. And at first it was true of my parents, and then it was true in school, and then it was true in all the rest of life, that I had no sense of self-esteem. I had no sense of self-love. I wasn't neglected at all. My parents gave us everything that I needed, and most of what I wanted. But it never was enough. I'm the black hole of love. I always want more, better, or different. That's a prescription for alcoholism. At least it is for me. If that sounds familiar to you, then you might be in the right place. I kind of kept my nose clean, at least didn't get caught, and so I got away with a lot growing up. And eventually, when it came time for me to go to high school, my father decided that I should go away to school, and that I didn't like that decision until a couple of my friends were going, and then I was all for it. I thought, I'll get there, and I'll be okay. I'll fit in. A geographic change, or geographic cure, what we call it in AA. And I've done that several times in my life, but that was one. And when I went there, I did well. I did well academically. I was the top person in my class in chemistry, which was really important if I was going to become a doctor. And in fact, I finished third, I think, in my class. And overall, and I was good in sports. And I was captain of the golf team, that was what my sister was so good at. And so I got a little bit of glory from that, I guess. And I really was too scared to do much drinking or drugging, because if you got caught doing that in that school, you got expelled. No questions asked. You're gone. There's no second chance, nothing, you're gone. And that changed later on, but when I was there, that's the way it still was. So I except when I went off campus, I just didn't do any of that stuff. And when I went off campus, I didn't do much of it because I couldn't afford to get caught. So I went to college. I really wanted to go up north to college, but my parents, my mother and father were from Canada, and they insisted that I go for a visit up there in January, and so I went to school down here. They were wise enough to insist on that. So I went to college I went to Duke, and 2/3 of the freshman class are pre-med at Duke, and they sit you down in freshman chemistry, and they say, look around. Two of the people sitting next to you are not going to make it, and that was what they did. That was so I was scared by that, and I was supposed to be on the golf team. But I was only, whereas I'd been the captain of the golf team in high school, and it kind of built my ego up a little bit. Gave me a sense of pride or something. And at college, I was just an also-ran. I was on the team, but I never played a match. And there were guys who were really good golfers on that team. And so the coach expected us to be practicing when we didn't have class, and that was really not something that it wasn't fun anymore. So I quit. And in the fall at Duke at that time, we actually have a decent football team this year, but back then we had a terrible football team. And so we had to come up with ways to smuggle kegs into the football stadium. And my freshman dorm had a keg mixer after a football game one Saturday afternoon. And a friend of mine challenged me to a chugging contest. And it was those plastic cups. Probably you all have seen those. And if you challenged me to run down New York Avenue naked, I would have done it, just because that's the only way I could get you to like me, So he challenged me to a chugging contest. I said, sure. I tilted mine up and chugged it, and he threw his over his shoulder, and he said, okay, well, now you got to give me a chance to get even, so best 2 out of 3. I said, sure, and same thing happened. And at that moment, or within the next 30 seconds, I guess, what makes me an alcoholic happened. And it's not what makes me an alcoholic is not all the pain and suffering that comes from overindulging in alcohol. What makes me an alcoholic is what it did for me. And it only happens to about 10% of the people who drink alcohol. A lot of people drink alcohol because it makes food taste better. I don't even understand that, but that's what a normal drinker, that's why they drink. Have a glass of wine with dinner. It allowed me to come out and play for the first time in my life. After those couple of beers, and of course I kept drinking a few, but I all of a sudden the insecurity and the fear and the sense of inferiority and all that stuff magically went away. It just dissolved. I don't know where it went, but I realized that I had been born with an alcohol deficiency, and I went about trying to solve that for the next 8 years. But that night, there was this gal who was she was a junior, and she was from California, a California blonde, and half the freshman dorm dreamt of Jeannie. That was her name, Jeannie. And she was the girlfriend of the resident assistant, who was also a junior on the dorm. He was a pre-med student. And, where I had always just been I couldn't possibly get within 10 feet of her. After those 2 beers, I went up and told her a joke, and she laughed, and I asked her to dance, and she did, and we had a great time. She was lucky to get to spend the evening with me. And I didn't, her boyfriend didn't punch me out. I didn't drink so much that I would later do. I didn't throw up. I didn't have blackouts. I didn't have a hangover. Nothing, no trouble. All good. And so that was sometime in the fall, and my schedule changed to accommodate drinking. There were guys who would go drinking while they went and did their laundry or whatever, and I managed to tag along with them. And after in the second semester, when I was looking at taking some serious biochemistry classes that interfered with my drinking schedule, I gave those up. I gave up becoming a doctor. I spent 14, maybe 15 years with that goal and quickly went out the window. Again, though, it interfered with my schedule, but it also was that I was no longer the best. I was a little fish in a big pond, and my ego couldn't take it. And I didn't realize that until I'd been sober for a long time, looking back on it. But that was the truth. I gave up being a doctor and decided to to go really bad and become a lawyer. And I never wanted to be a lawyer, really. What I wanted to do was to go to Capitol Hill. Back then, that was somewhat honorable, and work on Capitol Hill. So I got in this program at Duke that's called Public Policy, and I was pre-law, and I spent summers up on Capitol Hill, and I had died and gone to heaven, because not only did I get to work on policy things, which are interesting to me, they had these things called receptions at night, and the Washington Post would publish where the reception was that night. Every night there was a reception, at least one, and they were put on by various groups, and I learned quickly that you just go up to the door and say, "I'm Newton Pritchett, I work on Senator Kennedy's staff," if it was something that they were lobbying Senator Kennedy for, or I'm Newton Pritchett, I work on Senator Helm's staff, or I work on the House Education and Labor Committee, or just whatever it was they were selling. I was taking it because I was eating their food and drinking their booze and for free, and they didn't care. So it was like there was a group of us who kind of went from reception to reception. Those people either have the literature commitment in a group right now, or they're dead, because they have the same thing that I do. But again, it was all good. I began suffering some of those things like blackouts. I didn't even know what a blackout was. I had them for a while before I began to learn that it was like retrograde amnesia. You can't remember going backwards for a while. Hangovers, nausea, kneeling at the altar, and that porcelain altar, and saying a prayer to God. Oh God, I'll never do it again. I swear I'll never do it again. Or next time I will not drink dark liquor. Or next time I'll drink milk before I go out. Or I'll only drink. How was it? Beer on whiskey, mighty risky. Whiskey on beer, no fear, or something like that. And I got it mixed up somewhere in there. Just a whole lot of ways that I tried to control and enjoy my drinking. And it wasn't until I got in here that I found out that people who don't have a problem with alcohol don't have to try and control and enjoy their drinking. They just, after a time or two of having bad consequences, they don't drink as much, or they don't drink at all. But that was impossible for me. I had become completely dependent upon alcohol for my means of getting through life. And I had to put up with and adjust for increasing consequences. And they got pretty severe. I did a little bit of better living through chemistry, but what I did, I didn't become addicted to. And I think it's just, I was fortunate enough that with the stuff that I did, it was, that's kind of the way I felt about it too. But it was just making me one with the sofa. And that was the opposite of what I was trying to get to. I was trying to be the life of the party. And so I just, when it started having negative effects of other things, I gave the other stuff up. But never did I even think of giving up alcohol. I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't living under a bridge. The Boylan Street Bridge in Raleigh, they're well-known people. That's who the alcoholics were. I was doing well. I was in professional school. I was working on Capitol Hill, or somewhat, and had a promising future. But things. There were more and more problems, and I'm not really going to try and get into too many of them, because our habits, our patterns vary somewhat, and I wouldn't want you to think that, well, I didn't drink on Capitol Hill, so I can't be an alcoholic, or whatever. I did that for a while. I did that when I came to AA for a few months, listening to people's stories and say, well, yeah, I kind of felt like that, but I didn't do that. I wasn't that bad. I wasn't, all those things that I tried to distinguish myself from. But it turns out that, so in 1980, I'll put some time frames to this. 1980, I was supposed to be entering my last year of law school, and I came back from Capitol Hill, and my congressman was the congressman who represented the Research Triangle at that time, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and his office was in the Research Triangle Park. And I used to have a hard time getting to class. I was in law school at Chapel Hill, and I would really intend that this time was going to be different. I was going to have a day when I was going to go, and I was going to go to those classes where that sadistic professor would get up in front and call on people until he stumped you with questions. But I was going to go, but I just needed a drink to steady myself, and sometimes a couple of drinks I would get up and go, but a lot of times I would sit down in my drunk chair, and because I needed to catch up with the news for in case they came and knocked on my door and asked me to run for U.S. Senate, I wanted to be prepared. And a lot of times I would never get out of the chair. And back then in the afternoons was the main thing that was on was Jim and Tammy show, and I would watch them, PTL Club, I would watch that, and I would feel so sorry for all those people who were sending their money to build the Tower of Babel, or whatever it was they were building over there. And that was the view I had of religion. So I was, it was the opiate of the masses. So I was absolutely convinced that religion had nothing for me. But one day, after going to class over in Chapel Hill, I stopped by a congressman's office, and sitting there at the reception desk was a woman named Victoria, who he had just hired, and I fell head over heels in love at first sight. It was like going from, Bill says, an oasis. The drinkers are like that. It was like being in the desert, and all of a sudden, there's the pond with the palm tree. It just was. It was. She was it. She was the answer to me. And so we started dating, and soon after that, I went into the hospital for what was the third time with some ailment that they could never figure out what it was, but it had something to do with liver enzymes, and I lied to them about how much I drank, of course. But anyway, they gave me a spinal tap, among other things, and there's a certain number of people who react to a spinal tap with having these intense headaches every time they stand up, and that's what happened with me. So this was in mid-September of 1980, and I got out of the hospital, and it was Victoria's birthday. And I went to, walking wounded, I went up to this really expensive wine shop in North Raleigh and got a Magnum. I don't know whether you've ever seen a Magnum, but it's like that big. A Magnum of French champagne. Really expensive stuff. I spent a lot of my parents' money on it to take it to Victoria on her birthday, and I did. And she said, "You're just so kind. I can't believe you did that. Being injured and all this kind of stuff." But I have to tell you, I'm an alcoholic. I've been going to AA for a couple of months now, and I can't drink that. If I drink one sip of that, I'll be lost. And I said, "Really? That's terrible. I don't want you to be tempted. I'll drink it for you. I'll get rid of it for you. And I did. I proceeded to drink the whole thing and pass out on her sofa. And I think she may have had an inkling that she had her first 12th step opportunity, passed out on her sofa that night. But we started dating, but she was going to meetings. She was going to 90 meetings in 90 days. I didn't know what that was, but it meant every night she was not going anywhere with me. She was going to those meetings, and I couldn't go because they were all closed meetings. And she explained what that meant. And I got to go to some of the open meetings, which are all speaker meetings, but all the closed ones, which was where the action was going on, I didn't get to go. And I practiced my cross-examination skills to try and figure out what she was doing and who she was doing it with, and I just got insanely jealous. And over a couple of months' time, I just harassed her enough so that she finally said, "Okay, I'll take you to this open meeting, and there'll be a speaker." Because all the open meetings in Raleigh at that time were speaker meetings. And so the day after Thanksgiving, 1980, I went to my first AA meeting, not caring anything about what was going on in the meeting. I just wanted to know what my girlfriend was doing every night of the week. And this guy got behind one of these podiums. His name is Bryant. And if they say if you're an alcoholic and you go to enough of these meetings, you'll hear somebody tell your story from behind one of these podiums. And it happened to me the first meeting I went to. It was uncanny. It's still one of the closest to my story that I've ever heard. But somewhere along probably 8:45, something happened to him that hadn't happened to me yet, and I breathed a sigh of relief and realized I was not an alcoholic. But I kept going to open meetings, and I started going to Al-Anon. And like I said, Al-Anon is a great program for people who are affected by another person's drinking. But I had not been affected by anybody's drinking other than my own at that point. So I didn't fit in Al-Anon. But I kept going to open AA meetings, and so that was the end of November, over the next 4 months, whatever it is, through April, it got worser and worser. There's no such word as worser unless you're an alcoholic. And if you're an alcoholic, you know what that means. I don't have to define it for you. My mother, sometime in January, who was my last-ditch enabler, said, "I can't watch you kill yourself slowly like this anymore, and you're on your own." And about a month later, Victoria said basically the same thing. And then I was truly alone. I was suicidal. I had a plan hatched to get my car up to triple-digit speeds, which it would easily do, and slam into a bridge abutment on the way to Chapel Hill, and then they'd all be sorry because they hadn't loved me enough, And I envisioned that scene, crying over the casket, but I didn't really think that I wouldn't be there to enjoy it. But alcoholics have a good plan A and a lousy plan B. But thank goodness I didn't get to the point of carrying that out. But on April 9th of that year, I went to an open meeting, and Victoria was getting her 9-month chip. And I went up to her to congratulate her. By this time, we weren't dating. And I congratulated her and said, this is wonderful. What you're doing with your life is incredible. And she was really, her life was changing rapidly. And she said, why don't you pick up a white chip? And I was offended on your behalf. I said, because that would be dishonest. I said, I have a lot of problems. I'm suicidal, I'm depressed, I probably have multiple personalities, I can't seem to finish law school, I can't, my parents don't want to have anything to do with me, all this kind of stuff. But alcohol is the only thing that makes it bearable. I don't have a problem with alcohol. Alcohol is the solution for me. And but whatever, I rattled around in my head for the next 24 hours, and I didn't drink, which was unusual. And I went to another meeting the next night, another open speaker meeting. Same guy was telling his story that night. You all really needed a program chair because I need to be entertained. I'm going to these meetings to be entertained. And but somewhere during the middle of that meeting, I had a moment of clarity, and to me it came from a power greater than myself. I was incapable of forming the thought that I was powerless over alcohol. And I wish I could remember the exact details of it, but it had something to do with, if I'm waiting to get out of here and get enough courage by getting drunk to carry out my plan to kill myself, maybe, just maybe, possibly, somehow that means that alcohol has a power over me. I am powerless over it. And that was enough for me to get up at the end of the meeting, and this sweet little lady said, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired and want to join Alcoholics Anonymous, come up here and pick up a white chip. And I did. And I was surrounded by the men of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they told me something better than had they given me, $1 million check. They told me I never had to be alone again. And I try to remember that when I see somebody pick up a white chip in AA. I try to remember what manna from heaven that was for me. I thought the isolation problem had been solved. And it was for a little while. The next night I went to my first closed meeting. There was a guy named Tim. He was from Minnesota. He talked funny like this. And he was chairing. And I was coming apart. I was sweating and shaking and ready to flee. I think I overreacted. But I went up I'd heard people talk about sponsor and all these talks that I was going to, and I heard people talk about how it saved their life, and I was desperate. I had the gift of desperation, and I asked Tim to be my sponsor. And he said, sure. See those ashtrays? Go wash them. Some of them had bean bags. It was back in our unenlightened days when we smoked in meetings. And I had to ask, well, what do you do? How do you wash those? We can't get the beanbag wet. I knew enough to know that. And the guy said, well, you just put the rag under the faucet and wipe them out. Wow, these guys are brilliant. I just never would have thought of that. But I had to ask somebody for help. That's the key to that. I had to ask about something stupid like, how do you wash an ashtray? But I didn't know. I had to ask for help. Still the hardest thing for me to do in Alcoholics Anonymous is ask for help. To acknowledge that I don't have it all together. I don't know everything. I don't do everything right. I'm just a bozo on the bus, and I need another bozo to show me how to lean out the window and laugh. And But Tim was, God bless him. I think there's a special place in heaven for first sponsors of alcoholics, at least from what I've seen and what a couple of times I've tried doing it. Because I just hounded the guy. We fairly quickly, I told him my story. That's how he told me that's how you do the first step. You tell your story to somebody, and I did, and I was kind of afraid he would say, "You really don't belong here," but he didn't. And then we started getting into the second step. We started getting into came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, and I knew what they were talking about when they said power greater than ourselves. It was that capital G word that comes in the next step. And I had, as I told you, I got here completely closed-minded and prejudiced against not only the idea of a God, but the people who profess to have a belief in God. And so there was a lot, we did a lot of discussing. Because he'd come here with the same problem. He was a Polish Catholic, and he was absolutely, he hated the Catholic Church when he got to AA, he told me. But he had gone through the process of the steps and had a spiritual awakening as a result. And he was there to share his experience with me, if I would have it. And I was 51% desperate enough to try it. And he told me I could choose my own conception of a power greater than myself. And I couldn't argue with that. I could argue with what your conception was. I could argue with what rooms, in rooms like this I had learned as a kid what was. But I couldn't argue with my own idea of it. And Bill Wilson called that a 10-strike in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I absolutely agree with that. But that was slow. That didn't happen like first time we met. That went on for 4 months. And finally he got to a point where he turned those pertinent ideas, ABC, and how it works, into questions and asked me if I was convinced. If I was convinced that I was alcoholic and couldn't manage my own life. If I was convinced that probably no human power could relieve me of alcoholism. And if I was convinced that God could and would if he were sought. When I could answer yes to all three of those questions, he said, "Congratulations, you're at step 3. It's not on the little plastic sheet. And the next line in the big book says, "Being convinced we were at step 3. And I hadn't bothered to read the book at that point. So, and then I was faced with the capital G word. And I fought that, and I thought I had to be a saint, and I had all kinds of stuff. Finally, Tim moved away. He said he had a job transfer, but I knew he was just getting away from me. And he told me how I had to get a sponsor. I had to get a new sponsor, and I had to be right away. And not wait 6 months for the perfect person to appear. And he gave me a method for choosing that person, and I did. And thank God, I got Everett to be my sponsor, and he insisted that after I did that, made that decision, and got down on my knees and prayed the 3rd step prayer with another man, that I was ready to do a 4th step. And 4th step scared me to death. I thought if I write that stuff down, I'll be struck dead. I'll be turned to a pillar of salt or something. And I couldn't. I read the description of the big book, and I didn't know Mr. Brown. I didn't have an employer. I was not married at the time. Just didn't apply to me. So can't do it. But Everett said, "Well, answer the questions in the 12 and 12," and I did that. And I got like 2.5 legal pads full of writing, splaining. I had a lot of splaining to do. You can probably really do a good 4th step with answering those questions, but mine was more of a written 1st step, looking back on it. But it was the best I could do. And Everett said, "You got to do a 5th step," because I was delaying. And so I sat down and did a 5th step with Everett. And all except a couple of things on the 2nd legal pad about midway through that I wasn't telling anybody. I ain't telling nobody nothing. didn't have anything to do with drinking. It just, was stuff that I was mortally ashamed of. And so I didn't. I just kind of didn't get to that. Everett did a great fifth step. He told me things that if I'd have known about Everett when I asked him to be, I wouldn't have asked him to be my sponsor. This was a really sick guy. But he did a great fifth step. And he told me something that would haunt me later. He said, I'd have done the same thing. Alcohol just gave me the courage to do what I wanted to, but I would have done the same thing not drinking. And I later would play that out in my own life. 6 and 7 were a couple of paragraphs in the big book. It says take an hour, and it took an hour, and that's what 6 and 7 were. 8 and 9, I did amends that were relatively easy and painless. 10, I took your inventory. 11, I asked God to keep me sober. And 12, I'm sick, let me share it with you. That was the Newton Pritchett program of recovery, and I stayed dry for 10 years with that. Meanwhile, I had, Victoria and I had gotten married. I had finished law school. I tried to convince Everett that I'd get drunk if I took the bar exam. He said, appears to me you've been trained to be a lawyer. Maybe you ought to be a lawyer. Couldn't argue with that. Took the bar exam, got licensed, became a lawyer, got a job as a lawyer. Kept that job for over 30 years. Worked in a great environment. Victoria and I had 2 kids of our own. We had her stepdaughter, my stepdaughter, her daughter from a first marriage. She went back to school. Turned out she was a heck of a student. She had dropped out of school at 18, drunk, but when she was sober, she was a heck of a student. She became the top student in her journalism class at UNC. And I had a free ride. And but neither one of us were going to meetings. We kind of gradually stopped going to meetings. Life got busy, it's the standard thing. Like AA gave me a life that's too busy for AA. That's a bunch of BS. But if all you're going to AA is what you get out of it, that's true. At least that was true for me. I didn't drink. Neither one of us drank for 10 years, the last half of which neither one of us went to meetings. Our daughter was diagnosed with autism at 3 years old, and it was the last straw for Victoria. She couldn't see how to deal with that, and she picked up a drink that had my name on it. I could just as easily have been me. And so that was in 1990, and the next 20 years of her life, she went in and out of AA and got sober and went to treatment centers and got a boyfriend and went to church and did all kinds of things other than have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, and ultimately killed her. She died of gastric hemorrhaging, esophageal hemorrhaging in 2010. But going back to the early 90s, I was desperate. I hit a bottom that was way worse than the one that got me to meetings of AA, because I couldn't blame it on alcohol. It was that I hadn't changed. I had engaged in half measures, and I thought I was beating the system. Bless you. I thought, well, it's what we're about here is not drinking. And in a limited sense, yes, that's true. But what we're about is not drinking as a result of having a personality change, having a different basis for living. And I hadn't had that. Life was still all about me, what I got out of it, how you treated me, how my wife treated me, how my kids treated me, how my boss treated me, how my parents treated me. And I looked at it and I thought, I didn't get sober for this. And I didn't realize how close I was to taking a drink. I got an idea of how close I was to killing myself. What happened was on a particular day on June 22nd, 1992, but who's counting, I was going to St. Louis on an early morning flight for a hearing, and Victoria, who was doing a home, she was a writer, she was working freelance writing, and she had a home office. I went into her office to get something that I needed to take with me to the hearing that day, and there was a very well-written, lovely, romantic love letter to her counselor in the treatment center that she had just gotten out of. And I had just done a 4th and 5th step with my new sponsor, at which he gave me the assignment of deciding whether I wanted to stay married, whether I could be a loving and understanding and supportive husband. And I had decided that I could, and that's what I wanted to do. I'd been working on that daily for about a month at that point. And all I could think of was this. I knew it. I knew this was a sucker's game. I knew Leo DeRocher was right when he said, nice guys finish last. That this is what happens when you put your life on a spiritual basis. You get kicked where it really hurts. And but I had to go. I had to get on a plane and go to St. Louis for a hearing. So I was bawling. I was sobbing. I was a snotty mess. If it had occurred after 9/11, they would never have let me on an airplane looking like that. They would have thought this guy's got a shoe bomb or something. But I got on the plane. There was a guy. Of course, there was a guy sitting next to me on a 6 o'clock flight, drinking a Bloody Mary. But at about 30,000 feet, I had this sense. It was real. It was absolutely real. I was not imagining it. I had a sense that I was enveloped by this love, by a universal power, and that I was loved and cared for by something that I call God, regardless of what happened, regardless of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune here on this existence. But my soul, the part that was me, was protected, and it was the greatest sense of peace I've ever felt before or since. I've tried to recreate it 1,000 times since then, but God doesn't work on my demands. That's what I've come to the conclusion of. It's just. But it was absolutely real, and immediately followed by that sense of being loved, was followed by so the job that I have to do from now on, regardless of what I did to put money in the bank account, or the relationship I was in or not in, or all the circumstances of life were not what life was about. What life was about was being a channel of that sense of love and grace to his other kids. That was my job from that point on for the rest of the time, however much time I'm here on this planet. And so I consider that my rebirth date. And I don't live up to it, I still go for the fast money deals, the shiny objects, the get what I want out of a situation, and I pay for it, and I understand why I pay for it now, because that's not doing my job. There are times when I actually get to be a channel of that love to his other kids. I won't go through all the rest of the steps, but I went through them with a different attitude. And when I stopped trying to arrange life to suit myself, I am amazingly rewarded. It's just like the prayer of St. Francis talks about. So I've gotten to do incredible service jobs in AA. I've got to be somebody asked me about my time. I've got a whole series of ties like this because I fell to a level of being a trustee, and got to be the trustee at large for the U.S., which meant up until COVID hit that we traveled all around the world trying to be of help to other structures or even pre-structures getting started in AA. I got to witness Bill and Bob occurring in distant places. I mean, it's the same. You can pretty much see it. If you're aware of what our history is, you can pretty much see it taking place everywhere else. And it got to make lifelong friends and truly, I hope, make some difference to somebody. I don't know. Part of service is that, somebody somewhere will pick up a pamphlet that I left in a correctional facility, and it'll change their life. And I'd have no idea I don't get to see it a lot of times. It's general service a lot. So I'm always way over time. But here's the deal to me. I went to enough of those law school classes to be taught what a gift is. And a gift is defined in North Carolina as, trying to help you out, trying to give you a little free education here, Steve. I believe everybody has a gift to bring to Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't believe anybody walks through that door. The gentleman who's here for our first meeting, you are here because you have a gift to bring to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm absolutely certain of that. But there are three elements to a completed gift. It has to be a transfer. I can't just like hold it to myself and keep it and all that. It has to go to you. It has to be intentional. It has to be done with intent. It can't just be by osmosis that you benefit from something that I do. And it has to be received. If it's not received, it's not complete, no matter how good my intentions are. So I can't bring a gift to AA. I'm sure this isn't my gift, by the way, doing this, but I can't bring my gift to AA without you being here. And that's true of you as far as me as well. So I really do appreciate, Courtney, you having me here. I hope that was cogent in some sense. It felt like a real rambling, but that's kind of the way that I do this. That's why it's so difficult for me to do. So I'm going to shut up before I go another hour over time. So thank you so much for having me.